Okay, members, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll start the session. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that this land that we meet on today is the traditional land for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationships with their country. We also acknowledge that the Kaurna people as our custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important to the Kaurna people today. Again, thank you for coming along. So the purpose of this session, as you're aware, the Audit Committee had a special council meeting last week where they actually considered the draft budget, which was endorsed by council in March, I think it was. So this is actually an opportunity for I think the Audit Committee to provide the feedback directly to you as council members, and also for you to actually ask questions. You can ask general questions of the budget, but also ask questions of the Audit Committee. So Natalie Johnston is actually here as well. So she is actually our presiding member of the Audit and Risk Committee, so she's one of our independent members, and obviously that we have Deputy Mayor Shanks and Councillor Davies, who is also the council representatives that were at the Audit Committee. So there's no presentation for me or anything like that. So realistically, what I'll do is hand the floor over to Natalie to provide, I suppose, the general feedback from the Audit Committee. And then you can actually ask questions.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, well, I'll keep it brief and then we can just open to the floor for questions. We did have the Audit Committee last week and we looked through the budget. We also had a look, it presented was the ESCOSA report. I'm not sure whether you have had a look at that. It was a very, very comprehensive report. We did refer to that. You know, I think that's got some good findings, and as you know, it's an independent review. So you know that there's no bias, and that's what an independent entity has come in and believes. You know that the council needs to work on with regards to budgeting, long-term financial plan, and the asset management plans. Basically, the points that were raised at the Audit Committee, and I'm sure that they were discussed amongst the elected members as well, is that it's a very robust budget and it's one that we have to stick to. It's, there's no, in order for it to work and to determine long-term success, we have to be really diligent in monitoring expenses, and as well as revenue. We've got a target of increasing rates over future years, and we really need to stick to that, and we really need the elected member support to stick to the plan, because if we deviate from that plan, I mean, as we've seen in past years, it's a slippery slope, and if you're not bringing in enough revenue through rates, then you can't achieve your financial objectives. Also acknowledging that we really need to catch up with the asset renewal program. Wendy's done a great job in preparing detailed asset management plans, and that's the way forward to make sure that we maintain assets properly. That's pretty much all I had to say. I'm not sure whether other members wanted to say anything about the budget, but I'm happy to throw it open to questions and answer specific questions.
Look, I'm pretty happy letting everyone else speak. I mean, I've had multiple opportunities to speak to the strategy, being on audit and risk, and I have a funny feeling some of you might have listened back to the audit and risk meeting as well, so I'm not interested in repeating myself, but I'm more than happy to help with any questions and answers the best I can. I mean, obviously, not a financial guru, as our independent member is, and executive manager of finance, and now our CEO as well. So, yeah, entirely in your hands.
The first one, I suppose, is the rate increase, so 6% over 10 years. How realistic is that? Is it that we can stick to that, and also that the community can actually sustain that? considering what's happening globally and the fact that we might end up with a downturn in the way the globe is, people's retirement funds look like they're shrinking. You only have to look at anything. And so how realistically can we sustain that for this community?
I suppose, it's sort of chicken and egg. It's required to get the budget to work, and 6% is supported by guidance from the local government foundation. So it is, it's consistent with what other councils are doing. I understand, a lot has happened even in the last week in the global economy. I've been on the audit committee throughout COVID, and I understand that there are unpredicted events that do happen. The only problem is that we've had, over the past few years, we've had hyperinflation, and the thing, you can bring inflation under control, but doesn't mean the prices go down. It just means they just reduce at a slower rate. So we are playing catch up, and Sharon's done a lot of modelling, and the finance team, and that's the rates that we need in order to make it work, so we can achieve the council's strategic plan. Yep.
Debt's going to go up to 37 million in 5 years' time. How realistic is it that we'll be able to pay down that 25 million over 5 years, considering all the other things? I mean, we talk about asset renewal. Once you get to the end of the 5 years, asset renewal won't go away. You still have to renew assets. I'm still ambivalent about this crisis we're in about asset renewal, because when we look at it, we've got footpaths. Footpaths in my area are touted to come in 30 years' time. I mean, we have a timetable of footpaths rollout, 30 years. So the footpath budget is like this big over that long, and then to include them as underinvestment in assets, I find difficult. Playgrounds, again, all of a sudden we've had a change in strategy where we've decided to upgrade basically every playground. So I don't think that is not asset renewal. I just think it's just a change in the way that we're going to budget and do things. So I'm just really concerned about this almost crisis around having to renew assets. So I'm really concerned about that. I think it's a concern, and so I just want to know your comments about being able to repay that 25 million over 5 years to free up loan borrowing ability.
So there is a long-term financial plan, and it's been calculated going forward that it is going to be a tough few years, and then we have the ability to pay off that loan, but we just have to stick to the plan. As far as sort of the playgrounds and the footpaths, there's a certain service level that the constituents expect, and we have to live up to those service levels. If you think it's overkill on the playgrounds, then that can be looked at. But this is the plan that the finance team has put together to make sure that, as I said, that strategy is met, service levels met, and that we have a path forward that, long term, we can get the debt under control.
Yeah, but realistically, do you think it's realistic to pay back that 25 million over 5 years, given all things being equal? Because when we look at growth, it talks about growth, and we're going to get all this growth. We know that Cuddler's probably 20 years away, so we're just going to have Springwood and a few others. But when you have residential growth, you don't actually have a surplus because you have to provide all these services. So it's fairly neutral. You do get an increase in rates when it's commercial. I can't see any commercial. And even when we looked at Cuddler, there was supposed to be a commercial district, but we found out later that it's actually just going to be some shops. So, I mean, I don't know where this surplus is going to come from. I think that's my concern. Can you...
So essentially where it's actually coming from is where we're actually focusing on not necessarily the asset infrastructure, it's actually changing the cost structure of the organisation, because realistically, if we're not generating, so the plan is actually premised on this, on the assumption, and the repayment of that debt is premised on this assumption that we need to actually generate enough cash from our operations that essentially can fund our renewal program without borrowing, but and then that excess cash is actually goes off to debt, right? So actually reduces our debt. We will never pay. I won't advocate, because it's not actually a good financial management or a treasury management tool to sit there and say that we have no debt. That so it's just that question on whether the level of debt that we've actually got is actually the right type of debt. So how realistic is that is depending on how as an organisation that we stick to the fact that we have to actually make some underlying changes to our operating costs. So we don't necessarily sit there and say, oh, okay, we've had a couple of tough years and we've done all this hard work, so now we've got lots of money in the bank, so let's go spend it. So that is the discipline, and that's the realistic. So that depends on the realism of it. So if we can generate, and that's where we've actually, the financial strategy is a combination of having a couple of years of, I suppose, higher than CPI rates, because we need to actually still operate and generate that cash surplus at the same time as actually reducing our operating costs, or not growing our operating costs at the same rate as our revenue is growing from our growth. Yes, it is dependent on the growth and the growth figures that are actually in the annual, the long-term financial plan is based on information that Andrew's provided, which is based on information of what's coming from the modelling that we've done through the growth framework, through the integrated transport plan, through contacts with state government and all that sort of stuff. So it's not as though we've just created a growth figure to balance the books. So there is some starts that if that doesn't come off, each year what we have to actually do is to sit there and say, actually, this is what we thought that was going to happen. Is it still happening? I can tell you back in November, the impact of what's actually happening in the US was not considered, and there was no crystal ball that anyone would actually sit there and say that, that when Donald Trump gets in, that he would actually put unrealistic tariffs on everyone on the world. So, to sit there and say, so the plan was, the long-term financial plan was done in a point in time based on the information. The fundamental thing of whether we can actually deliver that plan is if we actually deliver to it, consider our strategy, to sit there and say, control our costs, focus on our renewal, get our infrastructure base right, and then we can actually create that opportunity to repay debt, and then we do that investment. It's actually the strategy, not necessarily the metrics of a rate increase. We will be reviewing that rate increase every single year. Yes, that's what we've said at this point in time, but the whole 12 months' time, don't forget that was actually back in November. Our budget is done, essentially, we start doing our budget, 18 months before the end of the year. So there's a whole heap of things that need to take into account that will change the numbers, but essentially the strategy or the fundamentals of the financial strategy is, let's focus on our expenditure, let's focus on renewal, let's make sure that we actually get funding sources of when we're actually doing investing, we're actually investing in, and our mix of sources of revenue or sources of funding is actually the right source of funding, how we use that. So that's really the important thing, is that what we actually need to commit to that, and then the numbers will actually flow through. But if we hell-bent on saying, oh, okay, well, how realistic is this 6 years down the track? No one can answer that question unless we're all committed to the financial strategy that we adopted through, that underpins our culture and what we actually, our decision-making and all that sort of stuff going forward.
I think a good point to make there. I think the conversation or the points raised, I think they're warranted. But we are talking about the long-term financial plan, and then the recommendation to the Audit and Risk was talking about the annual budget that is to go out for public consultation that links in to the long-term strategy, and that strategy is something we've been working on one way or another, whether it be playgrounds. I mean, I do sort of point out the fact that our playground strategy actually identified playgrounds that weren't non-compliant as well. So there were some compliancy issues that have been addressed. There was also some opportunity where there was some heavy vandalism in one of the playgrounds as well. So some insurance came into play, and then a little bit of extra needed to be put in to bring that up to a level that we're thriving for. And we're also talking about our playgrounds, if we talk about playgrounds, isolating that for a second, of how they are or how we're planning on addressing them over a 10 to 15 to 20 year window as well. So we never arrive at the point where all playgrounds need to be updated at once. And that has been a very common theme throughout all our asset management. Rather than some reactions that we've had to deal with in the past, this has been the lens that's been looked at. And whether or not we talk about our playground strategy, or we talk about our sporting precincts, or we talk about our footpaths, or we talk about our roads, what I've noticed and what I've really been liking personally is we've all been looking at the assets in that longer term vision as well, and that's where it has been helping in building the long-term financial plan. But what we're talking about tonight is the step one on that new strategy, and going, this is what we need to do of the step one of our 20-step strategy, 30-step strategy, never-ending strategy, whatever you want to call it. But we do acknowledge that these are the fundamental principles, and we understand that if we need a pivot in year 2 or year 3, we understand what levers can be pulled because we've done the auditing, because we've done the looking at our overall portfolio on what actually our assets are. And I think that's been an important piece that I think has been informative and intimidating all at the same time, if that makes sense. So yes, I think sometimes it could be a little bit unfair to ask what the tariffs are going to do to our ratepayers right now, but it is a warranted question. It's probably a little bit unfair for Natalie, but if you do know, let me know, because my stocks are taking a dive at the moment.
Probably just want a comment, and then I've got another question. This is the first, we're told constantly, this is the first of the new era. So of course we have to think long term, we have to think 6 years, because we're actually going to go out and borrow all this money to do this asset renewal, to save us money, all that sort of stuff.
Can I just correct you on that? I'm sorry, I have to jump in. We need to be clear for a minute that asset renewal is being funded by operations. The one key step you've made as a council is that you are no longer borrowing to fund your asset renewal. It's being funded from your operating position.
So what's the borrowing for then?
The borrowing is very clearly defined, as you've been provided, for assets that are new or upgraded.
Okay.
So there's a figure provided in the table today.
Yeah.
So, and I've tried to say this quite a number of times, what we need to reflect on here is this budget is a fundamentally outstanding story. We had a long-term financial plan which was predicated on this year coming in at a $200,000 deficit. What's been presented to you is a surplus position. We've got renewal now fully being funded by operations, which wasn't occurring in the past. That was going on the credit card, and it shouldn't have been. And that was setting the community up for hard yards going forward. By producing very minor surplus, that starts us to allow to have that conversation about repaying debt. Because until we get to a surplus position, there is no surplus funds to repay debt. So from my perspective, I think we're actually a year ahead of the game that we've predicated in the long-term financial plan. And whilst I can't clearly articulate the next year, I know already I'm starting to have conversations with my exec team about future possible savings we could make in the operations without impacting service delivery levels. And they are in the order of, you know, $150,000, $250,000, and they are going to come straight off the operating line. Now, I've got to have some conversations, I'm going to do some work, but as an organisation, I know we have now clearly positioned ourselves into hard savings mode. You know, we are cutting wastage from the business, and with the goal of looking to be able to have some options when we're looking at future rating models. Now, your long-term financial plan, it has to make some predictions. As Sharon's articulated, we make them with the information we had at the time. Every year that we mature as an organisation, we essentially review that 10-year plan, and it becomes 10+1 or 9+1 every year. And it will become more refined. Now, anyone that's honest will say that the first 5 years are a bit more concrete and the last 5 years are fairly, well, they're more predictive than concrete. My request of you is, yes, let's have an eye to the 10 years, but let's not lose sight of how important it is to get this first budget right and lock in some of the fundamental steps that I think we've made. And I think you're to be congratulated. We've made some very big steps this year. That must be on.
This is the reality. We've now got GARP. So this budget was formed before Trump and before we knew about GARP. One of the things in GARP is there's going to be the Northern Parklands. And the government has said that they want to put Gawler South down there within 3 to 4 years, okay? 3 to 4 years. Now, a comment was made at the Audit Committee that some of the people have been talking to, you know, the federal people and the state people about in-kind contribution instead of cash. I don't know whether that's going to work. I'd like I'd like to know where those conversations are going. Because if you're looking at a $50 million development, $50 million, we'd have to contribute 25%, which is what we've said in these documents, 25%. So we've got to find $25 million, probably almost now, because there's preliminaries and all those things that need to happen. It'll take 2 years to build. We'll have to find $25 million. Then all of a sudden we've got depreciation, then we've got maintenance, all the other things. I don't see that in this budget at all. I see that 11 years down the track, or was it 13 years I think it was, not now, because it is now. But anyway, I'd like to, get some update. That'd be good.
I actually share some of your concerns with that, because the challenge you've got is that right at this very point in time, it's the great unknown. There are so many unknowns. We know some of the key pieces of the puzzle, that yes, there's going to be Northern Parklands, yes, there's going to be a recreation precinct, and yes, Mr Champion has suggested has committed to getting South Football Club down in that new location within 5 years. We know that, but what hasn't been clearly articulated is what's the funding model to make that happen. Now, Deputy Mayor and I are booked in on Friday for a meeting with Minister Champion. Now, we're going to try and put the hard word on him to give us some greater levels of certainty about what's in his head and what the funding model looks like. But the truth of the matter is, at this point in time, no one knows. And because we don't know, it would be remiss of this council to try and guess what that looks like and try and amend their long-term financial plan. It's not going to impact on this budget. This singular budget they were looking at to go out to the community, whatever Nick tells us, it's not going to impact on this budget. But once Minister Champion, when Minister Champion does put some structure around the funding models, that's when we'll look at potentially recasting our long-term plan when we have some science to put behind the actions.
Yeah, and I guess just to build on that, because it was one of the points that I made in the audit and risk as well, and it also, I think the point I made on the night was, it almost gives you more reason to stick to your plan initially, because you can turn around and say, this is fantastic, thanks heaps, state government. But in actual fact, here's our books. We can't actually afford that. We didn't plan that. We planned that 13 years in advance, and we've actually invested in more master planning and some technical drawings over here on a smaller project that we need to get off the line, that we've gone out with our community and told we're going to do, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then to tie back to your employment zone comment before, which I completely agree with, our rate mix as well, where we turn around and we say, if we deliver more of the same, more residential without a better commercial opportunity, we're only going to be able to deliver more of the same. And if you impost us with a $53 million asset, how do we actually sustain that while also sustaining the new network of roads, while also sustaining the new playgrounds, while also sustaining the other ageing infrastructure that we now know of? Here's our books. Help us help you. But at this point in time, I think it is exactly the point why we shouldn't be intimidated or we shouldn't be reactive, because that is going against our own strategies at this point in time. Because if we react to the GARP that is merely only just come out, but there is so much structure planning, there is so much unknown, then we are in that reactive model that we've tried tirelessly to get out of, and we're jumping at shadows. And I don't think that's where we're at. And I think the relationship that we need to be forming with ministers that come in and say, this is going to be great, all right, cool, what opportunities have we got? And actually work on the timeframes, because it's not just about the Southern Sporting Precinct. It's actually about the structure planning and like infrastructure delivery as a whole. We need to understand the timing on all that stuff as well, because while we talk about sporting infrastructure, I know Wendy's sitting there and going, what about the stormwater infrastructure that's going to come into my... I've been in this room long enough, Wendy, I can read your mind. So, you know, those are the questions we actually need to nail, because the sporting infrastructure is one sexy item that we know about. But what about all the things that actually make community work day by day by day? And that's the conversation we need to be having. And that's what we booked in straight away. And I was at the Southern Rural Area community session the other Sunday and had a moment with Minister Champion as well, just to flag some of these things. Like, thank you so much for showing some attention. However, is the theme.
So on Friday, we'll know what the funding model is.
No, you.
Oh, I thought that's what you said, Chris.
No. What I said was
Sorry.
No. So what I said, we're going to ask the questions. No. We're going to ask the questions and try and nail down where the minister's head's at and the funding. It's not guaranteed that he'll be able to articulate it, because potentially the minister hasn't firmed up the funding model. But we are going to do our darndest to try and find out what it is.
Can I just jump in there and say that I think that I'm really reassured by that, because I think this council for a very long time, long before this session, has been very susceptible to being offered bright, shiny things by the state government as it gets close to elections, and we haven't had a strong strategy, a strong long-term financial plan, and we've gone with it, and that's part of the problem. So I think, as the Deputy Mayor has just said, being able to go back and say, well, no, here's our long-term financial, this is what we intend to do, puts us in a really good position for once. And Paul, I hear what you say, but I'm actually really convinced, having watched this council for 40 years, I feel that we are in the best situation to move forward. If you're concerned about things like the playgrounds, and I've had that concern as well, we need to go back to the original report, revisit it and say, do we want just upgrades, or do we want, because I remember us passing that report, and it was a big report with lots of dollars, and we went through, nobody quibbled it. maybe now, when we have a report like that, we'll get some more information about implications of the long-term and timelines as well. We've asked for that, and I'm sure we will. But I think we need to give the staff a fair go at setting us up for this budget. And the last thing I want to do is set this council up as being, when things are tough, it'll be the council that won't increase the rates. That doesn't happen at state government level, it doesn't happen at federal government level, it doesn't happen in private industry. This council cannot keep not rating because we're concerned that people in our community can't afford it. That we have plenty of strategies for people who are doing it tough to negotiate with rate payments, but we cannot send this council broke by just being too soft-hearted. We have to be good financial managers. That's our role.
Yeah, I've just got a question for the chair of the Audit Committee. Previous audit committees have sort of held council staff and council to sort of task on savings and getting the low-hanging fruit and consistently getting those lists of areas from council to try and look at those savings. Is that, I know it's there, but I have seen it in the past done really, really well by audit committees, and it's been really effective. I mean, this council has had to do it in the past a number of times. I just wondered what the strategy was this time.
Well, as you can see, with the long-term budget, we're now, for FY26, we're now in a surplus. So, you know, in previous years, we went back to management and we said, you know, there was a deficit budget, predicted deficit, and we said try and find, you know, another 300 grand of savings and go through every line item to work out how we get into the surplus. So we've got a budget now that is, you know, is in surplus and surplus going forward. And we, as an audit committee, we now get the monthly financial reports, which, you know, we didn't have previously in, you know, previous years. So each month we get the monthly update on when we are in a financial position. So then, you know, I can ask the questions and the committee can ask the questions as to how we're tracking on a monthly basis and to make sure that, you know, we're tracking as budgeted. I think it's a lot more robust than it was, you know, in previous years, having been on the audit committee for a number of years now. Does that answer the question?
No, that sort of sounds like, well, that's what normally the audit committee does. I'm sort of asking whether the audit committee is actually looking at doing something extraordinary. So.
I might try to jump in on that because the zero-based budgeting strategy was something that I raised again at Audit and Risk, and I've been working behind the scenes with Sharon and Chris to almost be able to provide that sort of information, because when we're turning around and saying, hey, we're trying this new zero-based budgeting, actually showing measurables I think is pretty important. So Sharon's actually provided a spreadsheet that will then flow through into the Audit and Risk, and we only just got it this afternoon, so I haven't digested it, but I will share it around. But what the idea is try to give you categories in the business and say the original budget was 500,000. We started from zero and we have now recalculated we only need 370. Now I'm just using real round figures here. But then on that line item, it actually then shows you the percentage under what it would have been if it was just a nominal CPI increase. Away we go. So that's that zero-based budgeting tool that the Audit and Risk working with staff and monitoring, and I actually put it on items listed for discussion next meeting as well, just so we could actually keep an eye on these things, because I think some of the dialogue that I'm noticing is, oh well, SCOs have given you a good rating because all you're going to do is up the rates, but in actual fact it's not just upping rates, it's also operational savings as well. But I'm also the skeptic in the room that says if we're going to say that, we also need to prove it. And some of that is what the Audit and Risk conversations are flowing into as well. So I'm hoping that sort of answers your question in some of the tools on what we're trying to look into on the Audit and Risk level to try to show these strategies in real time, not just hey, we're doing this, just trust us. Hey, we're doing this, here you go, here's the data, is the difference. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it helps a little. But I mean, I mean, it's been a while since I've been on an audit committee, but it was when I was on audit. I mean, there was some real challenging times with previous council budgets, and it's a common theme. But there was some amazing examples brought in from other councils and other strategies, and yeah, it was quite enlightening for us, and I think sometimes it was frustrating for staff, but it was empowering for the audit committee as well. So, and that's what I see the audit committee's job to do, is to be really robust and challenging, and try to be innovative as well, because there are things being done around Australia, and it is really important for councils to really, especially in this day and age, to be as clever as possible, especially with the times we've got. And with my background in the state government, we don't. Yeah, it's really difficult for us because we just don't have the increases other than probably CPI, and yeah, it is a completely different field from my point of view as well. So yeah, I'll go to the CEO.
Thanks for that. And I think I need to say, I think we're in furious agreement that as an organisation, we need to continue to push extremely hard on whatever savings and look at that for them all the time. But I think in terms of the initial demonstration, so we had a long-term financial plan that said we were going to have a deficit of 200,000 without increasing the rates any more than was already predicated. We've already achieved a $300,000 turnaround. Does everyone appreciate that? You don't just achieve that turnaround by not finding savings within your business. And then the next power is that the council, through the long-term financial plan, have said to me, Mr. CEO, for the next 3 years, we need to find another 3.5%, another 3.5%, another 3.5%. So the council's been really clear to me, and so that focuses my energies pretty tightly to deliver that for you. I'm always open for anybody that's got innovative ideas on how we can do it. But I think, and I sound like a broken record now, but if you give the organisation the opportunity to deliver, I'm very confident we will deliver for you.
And I just want to add, I remember the audit committee, when the audit committee gave, or Audit and Risk gave the recommendation of actually getting back to surplus. And I said, you're dreaming. I said that that's a really audacious goal. Yes, we will commit to it. However, I would sit there and say at that point in time, I would have said that there was no way as an organisation, where the organisation was at that point in time, that we could have delivered that. You know, as an organisation and as a chamber, we have done a lot of hard work, and we have actually had a lot of confronting conversations. Like, it's not easy for me to actually get up there and say some of the things that I've had to say to you guys as a chamber. But I think that we've worked well together, and I think that what we've actually done is that we've understood the realities, and we've accepted the realities, and we've actually put in a plan that will actually, if we stick to that plan, and yes, there's going to be deviations, it's not going to be a straight line, there's going to be some ups and downs and all that sort of stuff as well, but if we're committed to that underlying principle of making sure that we deliver on that savings, you know, I'll sit there and say, okay, well, yes, the chamber or the council actually adopted it, but it was us, an executive, that actually put those savings in there. We said, okay, well, we understand that this is actually what we need to do. And now it's our challenge that we have to do it with the rest of the organisation to sit there and say that they actually understand that this is actually the position. And I think that the budget that's been presented as a draft is a reflection on that those conversations have actually happened, and those conversations and people are actually responding to those conversations from that perspective. So I will have to sit there and say, collectively, I think we've done a great job, and it hasn't just been revenue. You know, it is that, because realistically, the turnaround that we've actually had, where we have had cost pressures, the information that Nathan was talked about has actually been provided in the document that Chris provided in response to Paul's question. So realistically, you know, this budget had from memory, it was like a 0.8% increase on last year's budget, you know. So even if you sit there and allow for the fact that we've actually got inflation, and we know that there's been cost pressures that we've actually incurred that have been over and above CPI, that is a fantastic effort that shouldn't be discounted. And to sit there and say, okay, well, you know, yes, how are we going to turn it around? You don't turn around the ship in one day. You know, it is that thing, and this is actually the first step. And again, with Chris, I think that we should all look at the positives rather than the negatives of what could happen if. You know, we haven't even started the year yet, and sometimes it sort of sits there and feels that, you know, people are saying, okay, well, it's not going to be delivered anyway. So, which is I suppose a bit disheartening for the staff who have actually put a lot of effort into presenting a budget that is good and that has actually achieved and overachieved what we actually set out to achieve.
So I think, and yeah, I'll be interested in looking at the documents, because it sounds like there's been a lot of great work done. I think I think it really, to some extent, is the specific examples, because I think a lot of us are probably numb to this point of every year things go up $1 million, they go down $1 million. We find savings that are temporary because it's just we temporarily didn't fill a staff position that you know, then got filled, or that sort of thing. Or, you know, we suddenly go $2 million in deficit because the grant funding that was meant to arrive on June 30th arrived on July 1st. You know, and so I think the specific examples probably will help in that regard, because it sounds, you know, obviously we recruited you because we wanted someone from a finance background to, you know, internally audit, and obviously that's what you've been hard at work doing. But yeah, I think the examples, the numbers at the council level sometimes feel like they just spin around up and down, and it would be good to see those concrete examples.
And I think, just to jump in there, I think the difference in communication styles and reporting that we've seen in the past, that now we're seeing, I call them superficial savings, because the rollover of projects can affect your balance sheet to look a little bit better or worse depending on the date. Not hiring or filling some roles can show you're in a better position depending on when it struck. And this way of performance, or this way of communicating, have acknowledged those, let's call them superficial savings, and not actually putting them down to operational savings. And that's the difference in language that we're seeing. We're sort of seeing look, we acknowledge that it's looking a little bit better this month and we're providing a positive surplus in our operations, but it should be noted that these positions haven't been filled and we plan to fill them. Yeah, and we're also seeing some capital projects that we know we need to do, but acknowledgement that it's going to take longer than June 30 to July 1 over a snapshot of time. So we're planning our procurement and we're actually budgeting over a 2-year period. which then manages the bottleneck. However, when we do see project rollover, we're clearly being shown the material consequences of that rollover and being clearly said, don't get too excited, guys, because remember, this actually slips into the July instead of the June. That's what I think is different, and that's what I hope is being noticed by elected members that have been through these budget cycles in the past and starting to benefit from that. The other point that I wanted to make as well is when we talk about CPI and, you know, double CPI, below CPI, or whatever else, we also need to be cognizant of what the cost of doing business is as well, because sometimes your contractor labour costs, your material costs for carrying out some of our fundamental services haven't just gone up July 1st, aligning with your CPI. Sometimes your price hikes are double, triple, quadruple, depending on where the market sits and availability and the like. You have to deliver a project before Christmas and all of a sudden you're paying a premium to do it. CPI doesn't come into that calculation. Bitumen supply, timber shortages, whatever we want to talk about that we've been managing for the last 4 or 5 years isn't aligned with CPI increases. That's what happens in a stable economy, and we haven't been in one of those for a while. So I just want to be conscious of the business we do isn't a flat rate of CPI increases, and that's the money we're going to spend dollar for dollar. And that's what we've actually proved with the zero-based budgeting point of view of we're not just going to go up CPI every single time and you're going to get given that bucket of money. Start from zero and rebuild it. And that's where we've actually picked up some of these non-superficial savings that I think we need to acknowledge and give credit where credit's due. Because halfway through this process, there might be a little bit of a hiccup. And unfortunately, we're going to have to give some more constructive criticism when that happens. But I think credit when credit's due earns us the right to be able to do that as well.
For what it's worth, I'd like to say something, and that's, as you know, we've got a drought in this country at the moment, a real bad one, there's no doubt about that. And, okay, I'm only classified as a hobby farmer, but I could see it coming, the way it's gone. And sheep that I had bred, I had to sell. And it's bloody hard when you breed something up and you had to sell it. I'm glad I did, because today it was announced that a bale of hay is $300 per bale. So we're going to see things pretty bad around, you know, around our area and in the mid-north. Every time I've raised the issue about when does a council look at its assets and decide to maybe sell some, because 58 councils in South Australia, and not many of them now own their caravan park. We have a at least a $3 or more $1 million caravan park. Why do we have it? Gawler Neighbourhood House, a very valued area in our town, all these sort of things. I'm just picking out a couple. But is there a point in time where the council says, well, hang on a minute, maybe this would help us, because we hear David and Paul say, as a lot of others have said, we don't want to put the rates up, but to be able to get some of this on the road, to be able to get back out of debt, is going to be that we have to put the rates up. We have to make big decisions on that. And finally, you know, last 10 weeks, and I read the communique this week, 2 more new staff members. I rest my case. I don't know where we're heading there. Why are we employing more staff, and that at the moment we're in the situation we are?
Thank you for that, Brian. First thing with the land conversation, I'm really pleased, and I want to thank Andrew for his work on this one. Andrew's turned his mind and put together a document for the exec team to start to have a look at, which has articulated all the parcels of land we own, what the revenue we earn off those, potential future uses. So We are going through that exercise to do a bit of work before we bring a brief into council, for council to have a look at that. So please rest assured, we're having a look at that one for you. The second one, when you say there's new staff, it's not new staff that weren't already in the organisation. So what you're seeing is we had a staff member, they resigned, we've reviewed the role, decided that we should continue, and then recruitment's occurred. They're not brand newies, because the only way I can put a brand new staff member on is if this chamber gives me permission. So please rest assured that when you're seeing a role that might have been vacant, we've recruited and there's a new staff member, yes, they're new to the organisation, but they're not new to our structure. Because the cost base of our structure hasn't grown.
The 16 million, it'll be. It's in the paper here.
Yeah, no,
I do read papers.
so that is the cost of running this business.
16 million's a bloody lot of money.
Yes, it is, but you need to reflect on the fact that we do run quite a large, complex organisation. And the way I premise that, though, is in every time we get a vacancy, we're putting a discipline around the question that needs to be asked. Do we need to replace it? Is there another way of doing it? Is there another way to achieve the community outcome by not having a fixed operating cost? So please know we are doing that every time. And sometimes the answer is, yes, we need the role. There are other times, and this is where I'm turning my mind, where we say, no, we don't need the role. So that's the viewpoint with those. Thank you.
Natalie, I just have a question in regards to I can understand the Audit and Risk Committee's recommendation around rates, and we need it. That is one aspect that we need to really stick to moving forward. I guess obviously it's our job to justify that to the community. I guess, and maybe touching on some of the things that have been talked about tonight, how exactly do we balance that, in your opinion, with our, cost cutting and also potential other streams of revenue? So, Brian did just mention about selling off assets. Is it commercial rates increasing within the town? Like some of those strategies, I guess, what you might call outside the box or innovative methods to increase revenue. What comment can you provide on that? Or is that discussion been had within the audit committee? Not as opposed to increasing rates, but maybe that complements it.
And we've had those discussions over various times over the last year and beyond the last year, especially with the rates and the commercial versus residential rates. Can we, there was a significant part of a meeting allocated to discussing, how can we get the rating model right so that, people that can afford a rate increase are, being, like the commercial rates, are they higher than the residential rates? And, what's our profile looking at? We look at, outstanding debtors, with rates, who, if there's any assistance that's required for ratepayers that are having trouble meeting their financial commitments. And we do, because, we go through the budget line by line, we do have various conversations about other sources of revenue. And, as we said before, that we monitor expenses, but we also, brainstorm revenue opportunities. So that discussion is had every meeting. So, and we're trying to think of different ways of doing it. It's great having Chris on board because, he's, as I said before, different experience, can bring lessons learned from other councils. I'm always referring to my day job. So I'm the CFO at the Department of Energy and Mining. So I've got a pretty good handle on state government and how that works. And, Gawler isn't the only organisation in this position. Every, local government, state government, the private sector, everyone is cutting back on costs and they're looking line by line at costs and also revenue as what can we do differently? Are there any game changers in there? because we don't want to just go, okay, easy fix, we'll just put the rates up and this is what we need to do.
No, thank you. And I think I can appreciate that. And I honestly think the community can appreciate that too, because, yeah, when groceries go up, it also means labour goes up. Everything goes up, and that's really good, providing that insight. I guess that is part of it, but also what we're being told is the other part of that is that historically this council hasn't been making good decisions. So I guess it's really tricky to justify putting that burden on people today for mistakes of the past to, I guess, in a way, bail out this organisation. Now, that might be some stronger language and not quite accurate, but that's, you know, what I'm hearing is, yes, absolutely part of it is we're living in a very unstable economy, but the other part is that we're actually trying to fix some holes that have arisen over previous years, and we're making progress on that. But I guess, you know, and this maybe is a broader discussion, but I think it's really important to go, okay, yep, this is the challenge we're faced with. We need to put up our fees because our expenses have gone up. Yep, I can understand that justification. But the other side of that going, we're actually trying to mend some mistakes that have been made. You know, is that where the innovative solutions are? Is that where, I guess, the expertise that sits on the Audit and Risk Committee, working with our administration, working with our community, go, okay, is that where we can kind of work in partnership? Because, yeah, I totally get what you're saying, I absolutely do, but that's not the whole picture. So I think it's important we can't just kind of blame that and go, okay, community, pay up, when actually these are errors of the past that we're also paying for.
And that makes sense. I mean, it's the intergenerational dilemma, and, you know, sometimes, you know, past generations can make really great decisions, and so therefore that makes in the future generations it's easier on them, but, you know, and vice versa. I mean, I look at things like, you know, this building like that. I wasn't on the audit committee at the time, but big decision to do the works on this building, and now we're sitting in here. I mean, I don't think we could afford to do what was done now with the cost of, you know, materials and that. So, you know, it's what, you know, making, as we said before tonight, is making the best decision that we can with what we know at the time, and using, you know, utilising the expertise on in the table, like with the comment before about scrutinising, you know, management's decisions and budget lines. We do that. But then I also have a lot of faith in management, and they're a great, I've been on the audit committee for a number of years, they're a great team, and I don't want to strangle them, you know, so for example, you know, last year we had a budget that was based on a certain rate rise. Council didn't agree with that rate rise, so the whole thing had to be reworked, and the amount of time and energy to rework it all, and then it ended up being a budget deficit, et cetera, et cetera. So you've also got to take pride in management and faith in people, and as we've said before tonight too, that we're really confident in these numbers, you know, compared to, you know, a few years ago. The numbers and we had the COVID effect, and the numbers kept changing. There was a lot of variation, but the fact that every audit committee meeting, we're seeing, you know, year-to-date budget, you know, the forecast, the actuals, and they're all landing bang on. Like, you know, the ability for management and the finance team to forecast their year-end position is amazing. It just shows that they have a really good handle on the numbers. And as a sense check, you know, I know from experience that it's when you end up at the end of the year and your actual is completely different to your forecast, that's when you know that, I mean, management don't really have a handle on the numbers, and it's just that sense check doesn't work, if that makes sense. So we're really knowing what's in these numbers. And so, you know, we're asking for support from the elected members. You know, this is management's plan. There's an awful lot of work has gone into this. Let's give it a good go. And as we were saying, that, you know, this might be the plan for the next, you know, few years, but then we might get traction, and we might, you know, we might change direction, or, you know, we might be able to do more stuff, different things, because, you know, it's worked, and, you know, we've made additional savings, or we've come up with something really innovative that has increased, you know, a revenue source that no one thought about before. So, yeah, I think it's just having a bit of faith in management and supporting them. And then, you know, when you support people, that's when they come up with well, you'd know from your day-to-day life that when you're fully supported, that's when you come up with really good ideas and the ability to think outside the box. And they can be game changers.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, and I guess elected member to elected member, I know what I'm sort of spruiking out there. And it is a flare of positivity with a level of scepticism to say we need to understand what we're working with and see it run its course to either understand if the strategy is the right one or the wrong one. I understand it is easy to try to figure out where we went wrong in the past. To me, where we went wrong in the past comes at a value of not repeating past mistakes and then underline, that's it. Because that's what you do in any business. You understand what works and capitalise on it, and you understand what doesn't work and try to avoid doing it again. What that then links to is that quality improvement culture that we are seeing come through in the auditing and asset management style, because the ability to deliver on our actuals within a plausible percentage of what we thought they might be only comes from proactive management rather than the reactive. Because in the past, we've seen, oh, we're going to budget this. Oh, shit, that just blew up. Now we need to throw a couple of million at that. You know what I mean? Like, so then when we get to the balance sheet and we're looking, oh, well, to make this work, we'll delay that project a little bit, don't take on those staff, yep, all good, we're within a realm, but realistically it's superficial savings. And it just keeps on compounding, it just keeps on going down the road. And the ability, which I've always stood by, is the ability to be able to be a ratepayer, which I am a ratepayer as well, as a lot are in this room. I don't like paying rates, I don't like paying tax, I don't like paying all the things we do for fees of service and the like. But if I can, hand on heart, be able to say what your money is going to, what my money is going to, I don't like it, but at least I can explain it. What has happened in the past was we're going to deliver on this budget, then we don't deliver on the budget, and then there's a whole bunch of other things that happen. And it takes away our credibility. We don't have, I think Councillor Solomon put it really well, we don't have that social equity with our community and that trust that we have to build, because we're spending their money and all they see is we're not spending it as efficiently as we can. And the mix of operations being paid from our credit card and increasing debt without any proper reason why, and all this was just flying by the seat of your pants, really, because we didn't actually understand the renewal side and the like. So I guess that's my long-winded way of saying that I think we're employing a lot more business strategy in our operations than we ever have before, because this is a company and we need to run like a company. Personal reactions and opinions in the past, one way or another, have probably driven a couple of directions here and there, but that's because we have lack of any other business plans in its place. I think we're filling those voids now.
Are there any more questions? So, if there are no other questions, perhaps we should take a 5-minute comfort stop, and then we'll go into the next session where we're actually going to give some insights into some of the innovative thinking that we're putting into place around our revenue structures.